So working in Advanced Steel 2017 in the US version, most people might have a bit of trouble trying to draw a staircase for the first time, and especially if you're in the plant industry. So this is the way I'd go about trying to resolve that issue and trying to set some defaults in the system. So the first thing I'm gonna do is just set up some sort of baselines to give me something to work from. So I literally just draw a couple of AutoCAD lines here in the system just to give me some form of reference point to work from. And then I'd come into the stair macro, which is up on the extended modeling tab at the top, and leave it as default at the moment, which is the angle and length. And I'm just going to pick these two reference points as I'm prompted. I'm going to set it to go to the middle, which is the default. And I guess most people will get that when it comes in, which is fine. If you're like working in the architectural market, you might want a closed riser tread with an angle support underneath. But for most people in the industrial sector, they're going to be looking for something slightly different to that. So we're just going to check the tread formula. I've got a standard rise and run here of 7 and 11. So obviously that's worked it out based upon the length and height I put in originally, the reference points. I tend to do that when I'm drawing a stair because I normally know where I'm going from and to, and it just helps to have those couple of reference lines in place when you're trying to set up the parameters for a stair. So we're going to set about changing this stair. So obviously the tread type at the moment is set to type 21. You can see it highlighted down here. For a grating tread you might want 1 or 2. So we'd come in here and we change that to 1. And as we do that, we can see the stair changes. Let's put a grate type tread in there. It's left the first step as a folded plate. We'll notice this strange size listed here. If we then come into the next tab, you'll see that it says a standard grating, and it's got a reference to a manufacturer in France. So that's probably not very good for the US. So what we can start doing here is, what I would recommend is to use a variable grating. This enables you to then adjust the width of the stair. It will then change the grating class below, and you just come into the drop down here and you need to look. There is a generic one been put in for 2017, which is grating US Imperial. So if I change that, the grating is going to change to that. There is a list of sizes in here that you can use. I'm just going to leave it at the 1.5 by 8 one, the very first one. I'm just going to change the tread width. So this is actually the length of the tread, so across the from the front to the back. So I'm going to make this 12. So that's 12 inches. And you'll notice in the next tab, this is all to do with the side plate here. Now at the moment you can't see the side plate, it's not turned on. So if you just pop back to the tread type, you'll see that this is actually blank here. This field here is actually blank. So just pop in there and go welded and bolted. And you should see it then start to generate the nuts and bolts and obviously the side plate. So obviously that looks a little bit tight under there at the moment, so then I would just pop back into here and you can start adjusting this as you want. So I'm just going to type some measurements in here, and this should change the length of the depth of the plate there. I'm going to look at the figures. Number 4 is obviously the top distance, so you know I could make that 2.75. There we are, 2 3/4 inches, and that should drop that down. So obviously that's a little bit much, so we might make it 2.5. So you can just play around with this as you need to. And then obviously the length, you might want to change the length between the bolts. So I'm just going to adjust a couple of settings at the moment and move them across there. So that would have affected all of those. I might change the side plate thickness to 1/4. Just to make it a little bit thicker. So it can come back here, and now that's been applied, we could then sort of go back and change the width. So you do have to change tabs. Appreciate there's quite a lot going on in each one of these tabs. So here you will have noticed now the width of the stairs become available because we set a variable grating. So we're just going to change that to 3 foot. You can change it at any point. I'm then going to start working my way back through the tabs. I'm going to leave the stringers as they are at the moment. I mean, you might want to use a different type of channel, but you could just change it in the drop down list in here. The only thing I might adjust is the offset from the stringer. So this is the distance from the front of the nose. So I'm just going to put that in. So obviously that's the channel there. And what I was trying to adjust is this distance from the edge of this plate to the edge of this channel. So if I just go back into the macro, so to get back into the macro, just double left click with your mouse on the joint box around the edge of it, and it'll take you back into the macro. So I changed that offset in there to 1 inch. So now we want to start sort of just go back through that. We're not going to alter anything else with the treads just at the moment. We're then going to come back into the steps. Now you'll notice that the top step actually changed here. That's because this checkbox is ticked. It means everything else is greyed out. Very typical in advanced steel. If something's greyed, something else is controlling it. In this case, this checkbox is controlling it, which is making it the same as everything else that's already been drawn for the step general tab. So we're going to do the same with the bottom tread. You'll notice that that's not ticked at the moment, and it has a different infill panel that would have applied to the previous type of stair. So in this case we can check that box, and now it will make it appear the same as everything else. Again, the other fields or other tabs would be greyed. The last main tab here on the left is to do with the landings. So we'll start at the top here, and obviously these two checkboxes are already ticked, which is creating the front and the rear landings. Obviously we're using the same channel as for the main stringer. You might want to use a different one. You can obviously change it, and again you've got a checkbox here as well, which is greying out the rear option, but if you unchecked it then you could access it and put a different one in. So let's start looking at the parameters for this. So this is the length, so I'm going to change this to 36 inches, 3 foot, and that'll change that one. Probably going to leave the weld as it is. Now at the moment this little checkbox is hidden away in here, creates the last tread. If you uncheck that, it will turn it off. I'm also just going to change this to 0 for a minute, the landing offset. And then I'm going to change to the next tab, which is the top cover. Now this, you could make it out of a plate, and it will draw a plate in. And it'll put some angles, etc. in there. You could put it to a grate. So being as we're doing a grate, I'm probably going to change it to that one. You do have to put the thickness in here, so I'm going to put 1.5 in here. And again, it's the grating class. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to scroll down until I see the generic one for the US. I'm going to leave it as the first one. While I've got the angles activated, I can actually come down and just change tabs here, and you can access the angle size. This is not always available if you don't have supporting angles, so it's probably good to set it to a size that you might require. So in this case I'm doing 2 1/4 by 1/4, and again I'm just going to put the offset figures back to 0 at the moment. So that'll align that back with the top there. Just flipping back here, this is the edge distance here, number 2, if you look at the little picture here on the right. So that's the gap, so you could make that 0.25, and it will close that gap up, so it's 1/4 inch now if you want to. You can force the to be on top of it here, the top cover, just by ticking that checkbox, and you'll notice that the angles have actually turned themselves off. So if we just come here, just flip back to this one a minute, to the top landing. Okay, so we've got that at 36 there. We've got the landing offset. Okay, so we're going to just come down here. Now the thing to remember is the length of the cover. At the moment the tread's quite short here, so it's only 10 inches. So we'll probably just make it the same as the other ones. So we'll make it the length of the landing just for this purposes. So it's 36. You can see it goes to the end. So the thing, I put the reference line in there just because I'm trying to create a standard, just to make sure that I'm still complying with my rise and run here. So at the moment I can see that the tread is not, the nose of the tread is not where I would expect it to be. Okay, so it's not in the right place. You can see that just by looking at it. I can see it. So let's just go back up again. And once you get used to working in this dialog, you'll sort of figure out where things are. So what I'm going to do is there's a little checkbox here, distance from nosing point. So if I check that, it's going to move that and put it so it lines up with the nosing point. Now you might not always want to do that. You might need to adjust it for some reason, but you can do little things like that. And you find when you're playing with these settings that you can adjust things, and some things when you don't think you should do them, you do actually have to do them. So just for the purposes of that, I'm just going to set that at that position there. So now it should give me the same rise and run as the rest of the stair. So obviously I probably need to replicate this at the bottom, and the bottom landing is down here. So the same thing applies. Okay, just work your way through here. In this case I'm actually going to check that to start off with, and I'm going to change this again to 36 because I'm just trying to create a standard in the system. Okay, and I'm going to uncheck the first create tread, so you'll see that bottom tread just turned itself off, and I'm going to go to the bottom cover. Again, I could set to plate. Okay, at the moment it's got it on top of the stringer. If I uncheck that just a minute, it'll probably put it down inside, and the angles become available, so I can just get in quickly and change the angle size to what I require. So I'm just changing this to 2 inch by 1/4. What I'm going to go is go into the grate here, because I want to make it the same as the other one. So 1.25, sorry, 1.5. And then I'm going to change the class type again. So I just scroll down in here, Grating Imperial. And again, I could force it to be on top of the stringer. Okay, and it will adjust it. I'm probably going to change the offsets to 0 just at the minute. Okay, so that's put it aligned it there. So I probably just want a little bit of overlap there at the moment, just to put something in there just to show there's a little bit of overlap. Okay, so that's changing that again. You might want more, you can put more in yourself. Okay, you can see the angles are greyed out now, okay, because we're obviously not using them. There's a couple of other options in here as well. So at the moment, obviously the tread is actually at the nosing point, but it's not actually extending back under here to form the actual bottom of the tread, the step that would have been there. So you can add a distance or you can move it in here. So here, so if I just type in 12 for a minute and just see what happens. So that'll move that and it'll give it an overlap. But what it's actually done here is obviously it's now short. So you just need to come back in here and just add the 12 back on. So if we put that to 48, it'll move it back out. So we've got something that looks fairly reasonable, might be a good start point for a stair. There's a couple of other little tips here that might help. So just popping back up in here under the step general, if you go to the tread type, you'll notice there's a tread size here. Now that probably doesn't mean anything. Well, what you can actually do is you can save your tread configuration. So when you've configured it all in here, you can do a save as, and you can call it a reference. So if we just type something in here, great US test 1, or maybe I call it type 1. Let me see. Now when we do that, it actually stores that in the system. So that tread will actually get listed in there. So you could actually call that back in a different stair. If you had a different configuration, you could call that tread type back up, and it will bring back all these parameters that you've stored. So if you have manufacturers or something, you could even set their parameters in here, just using the generic grate type, and just call it that, and it should come up. A couple of other things, obviously the one thing to watch out for here as well, shop means that everything could be welded or considered one assembly. You can change that. Okay, so probably change it to that one, and I'm probably just going to update that as a save, which will actually overwrite the parameters. So even though I created that before, I can actually overwrite those parameters if I decide to change something. I'm just going to come out of the dialog for a minute. I'm just going to show you what that actually did. It actually made it so that the stringers were independent from the treads using the tools under the selection palette here. So these are like considered to be welded together, and all the individual items are then bolted to them. Just clearing my marking there off the same palette. So with that done, one final step, just to come back into the joint dialog again, is the library. And what you should do is save the values in the library. You'll see that the lines appeared there in the top. If you go into the edit button, this takes you actually sort of, you're looking inside the database. And what we can do in here is type this phrase in here, default, just make sure I type it correctly. Notice we do have a default in here already, so I'm just going to rename that. Okay, and you can see just by quickly looking in here, what it's doing is it's actually storing all the different parameters you set within the macro. So it is important to go through the macro and store all the different options, maybe cycling through a few of them, even though you might not need them. You can actually set them in here, and then they all get stored in the line in the database. I mean, there's quite a lot of them. You can see I'm just scrolling through here quickly. There's literally every single button tab you can see in there. It's actually stored in here in its own cell. Important thing when you finished editing something is to go OK, so that will actually store those settings. So if we were to just maybe just copy these two lines to one side, so just use your AutoCAD copy selection. I'm just going to copy those to one side. I'm going to try and redraw the stair now. So just set the parameters, pick the 2 points. And there we are. It comes in by default. So you've got a very good start point for your grating type stair. Hope that helps.